They say your life flashes before your eyes before you die. Well, mine didn't. At least not literally. But maybe suicide doesn't count. All I remember going through my head as I stood on the parapet of that bridge and gazed down into the inky black waters beneath was a deep sense of resignation. I'd been over and over everything in my head 1,000 times already, and all that was left was just that one single step. Just put one foot in front of the other, like I'd been doing my entire life. The cool night air felt fresh and cool against my face, like the farewell kiss of a long-lost love. I closed my eyes and raised a foot into the empty air in front of me. And that's when I hesitated. Hesitated just long enough for my life to take a very different turn. A dry, sardonic laugh echoed through the night. That kind of world-weary chuckle that suffocated the seriousness of my intent in an instant. I opened my eyes and turned around. A figure was idling towards me in the darkness. "All right." His tone was breezy and light. I did my best to ignore him, but he walked up and sat down on the wall beside me, facing into the bridge, and took a small pouch and began rolling himself a cigarette. Halfway through the process, he looked up at me sideways, his eyes glinting in the orange streetlights. "So, how's things?" I just stared down at him. "Just peachy, thanks." He laughed again. "Yeah, that looks like it." His nimble fingers produced a toothpick-thin cigarette, which he licked and lit with the dexterity of a stage magician. He took a long, deep drag, and then exhaled a thick plume of smoke into the night. This silence that stretched out between us like thick toffee. Eventually, I just couldn't stand it any longer. "Look, I don't want to talk about it, and you can't do anything to help me, so you might as well just leave and let me get on with it." "Fair enough. I'm not exactly a good listener anyway." Right. Good. He took another drag, letting the smoke hang in the air a moment. "But how about you do something for me first?" Now it was my turn to give a little laugh. "For you? Like what?" "Oh, it's pretty simple, really. You just give me 1 year of your life." "A year of my life? Is there an echo out here?" "You're crazy," says the guy about to take the shortest swim of his life. "What have you got to lose? You've been master of your own life so far, and where's that led you? To this one-off high dive performance for an audience of one." He grinned, his eyes twinkling from beneath shaggy, unkempt hair. "You don't want it anymore, so give it to me for just 1 year. Is this a kind of sex slave thing or something?" A deep chuckle reverberated across the bridge. No, nothing like that. You place your life in my keeping for 12 months. And after that, we part company, and you can do whatever you want. Your life is your own again. And if you want to come back here, well, that's entirely up to you." He threw his cigarette over his shoulder, and I watched it spiral down to the rushing water below. Just 1 year. No time at all, considering you're a long time dead. I still think you're insane. Why should I trust you? He grinned. You, my friend, are a good judge of character. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out, holding it out to me in his closed fist. Call this your insurance policy. I sat down beside him on the wall of the bridge, legs dangling over the river beneath, and put my outstretched palm under his fist. He opened his hand, and a small, but reassuringly heavy, thing dropped into mine. It was a tiny double-barrel revolver, inlaid with a silver pearl handle. It looked old and well-worn. It's a Derringer, and I'm told it's an antique. I turned it over in my hand. Careful, it's loaded. Try it. I pointed it down to the water and pulled the trigger. There was a sharp crack, and a tiny weapon jumped in my hand as the bullet splashed into the river. One shot left, and that's your get-out-of-jail-free card. It'll save you the drive back here if you ever want to get out of our deal at any time. And if you're worried about me doing you a mischief, well, that's your security right there. You're holding all the aces. So what's it gonna be? I felt the weight of the tiny pistol in my hand and considered this strange suggestion. A brand new life for a year. Free from everything that had driven me here in the first place. It could be like being born again. I'd already walked out on my old life, so why not start anew? And it was true. I'd royally fucked up on my own terms, so why not live a life on someone else's for a while? I turned to the wild-eyed stranger and raised the barrel of the miniature gun squarely to his forehead. He was right. I did have nothing to lose. A wide grin broke across his face, and a twinkle of something like anticipation danced in his eyes. I think we have a deal, I said, pocketing the revolver and striding away from the bridge. There's an old Chinese curse that I've always liked. It just says, "May you live in interesting times." Well, my life certainly got a lot more interesting from that night on. My mysterious benefactor, if you could call him that, was unlike anyone else I had ever met. He showed me that beneath the surface and beneath the veneer of the humdrum normality that most people work hard to lose themselves on a day-to-day basis in, that there's another, deeper world lurking in the cracks and the shadows, and it is unlike anything you've ever experienced. My newfound friend and I, we traveled to all the secret corners of the world and met people who seemed to straddle between the boundaries of what was real and what was otherworldly. In those 12 months, we lived every possible kind of life you can imagine. We dallied with the drunks and the downs and outs in the neither realms of New York, rubbed shoulders with the rich and famous on the streets of Monte Carlo, and even lived for a time in a weather-beaten croft in the remote and desolate highlands of Scotland. My companion seemed to know everyone and could open doors into areas that I never even knew existed. He seemed to exist in the margins of reality, and he was certainly insane. That much was certain. But his insanity was infectious, and he introduced me to countless other strange and unique individuals all around the world. It would be too easy to dismiss this all as like some kind of madness. A shared folie à deux which my companion included me in while I was emotional and in a vulnerable state. But that's the kind of explanation the old me would have put to things. So I could take up those experiences and tidy them into a neat little box and not have to think about them too much. But one thing I learned, perhaps one of the most enduring lessons that I take with me, that I'll take to my grave, is the fact that perception is reality. Those dark, creeping things we faced in the moonlight of Sri Lanka, those shape-shifting messiah that we cornered in the back alley of Wall Street, and every nightmarish entity that almost stole us away from both of our minds in the toilets of that illegal club in Munich, though they might not seem possible in your world, their existence is as real to me now as the ground beneath my feet, and I still bear the scars, both physical and mental. Whenever I asked my companion about himself or his life before we met, all he would give me was a light-tipped little grin. "I'm just another pilgrim," he'd say. "A fellow traveler, just like you." Eventually, I just stopped asking. In the end, it didn't even really matter. I'd closed the door on my old life, and the moment I walked off that bridge, so now, everything was a voyage of discovery. There didn't seem a point in looking backwards, not when every day held such challenging, testing new experiences for me. And it was all I could do to keep up with him. I felt like a tightrope walker, afraid to stop and look down for fear of falling. I lost track of time as the year wore on. I knew we were balanced precariously on the very edge of reality, between madness and sanity, and I knew we were playing a very dangerous game. Even as I was exploring these new realms that my companion opened up to me, I think I always knew things were not destined to end well. You can't play fast and loose with the rules of reality like we did, and just expect to come back one day and it not kick you in the face. Eventually, it was the turn of the season that reminded me of our deal. The sting of winter gathering in the air again, and the Derringer seemed to weigh more heavily in my pocket than it ever had in all of the time that we'd spent together. I had never let it leave my side. I began to think, what would happen once this year was up? Would we just go our separate ways, or would I be left to fend for myself again, knowing what I knew and having seen what I'd seen? There was no returning to my old life. No, that was for sure. Those days already felt like the memory of some half-remembered dream. I was suddenly very aware of time passing. My companion seemed to grow more and more distant as the days rolled on. Did he have a plan when the year was over? Was he hatching another mad scheme with me at the center of it? Or maybe it was just me. Maybe the deadline drawing closer made me get paranoid. My newly attuned senses were picking up on things that just simply weren't there. But still, I began to look at my friend with new eyes. He'd always been secretive by nature, and now I began to read dark intent in his every move. I'd seen him be callous, even brutal. in the way he dealt with people, and I just knew how easily he could turn on a whim and throw my whole world upside down. He was a man of his word, but once our deal was done, there was no telling what he might have in store for me. We returned to my hometown without a word said between us. It was just this looming deadline. The old streets that had once been my house seemed populated by sinister shadows and malicious whispers that just died away before I could catch them. The place was utterly alien to me now, like a cheap stage set filled with bad bit part actors. It gave me this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I didn't want to be back there again. My companion appeared to grow more distant with each passing day. He seemed flat, uncommunicative, and my growing fear and suspicion filled his silences with unspoken, sinister motives. It got so bad I could hardly bear to be around him. His very presence began to feel threatening to me, and his unpredictable and eccentric nature, which I had once found so intriguing, now only instilled in me a growing sense of dread. I became so convinced that I had to do something and do it soon, before the year was up. A kind of heavy malignancy seemed to hang in the air, tainting everything it touched. The tension was almost unbearable. We were driving back to the bridge in his van when things finally came to a head. He wouldn't say that's where we were going, but the streets themselves seemed to lead us there with an eerie inevitability. It was a year to the day since we'd struck our little deal, and as the time ticked on, I grew more uncomfortable every second. Pull over. My voice sounded thin and wavering against the low growl of the band's ancient engine. He looked over at me with something like resignation in his cold blue eyes. The van slid to a halt, a small lay-by on the outskirts of the town. "And so we've came full circle," he muttered under his breath. I took the Derringer out of my pocket and pointed it squarely at his forehead. It looked ridiculous in my oversized hand, like a child's toy. But something in the manner that I was holding it must have conveyed the seriousness of my intention. He shut off the engine. "Get out of the van," I said, still without a clue to what I was going to do next. Without a word, he opened the door and slid out of his seat. I followed, the cold night air washing over me like icy water. We faced each other by the side of the road, the lights of the city twinkling in the background. So now what? As ever, he seemed entirely unfazed by this new development. I was about to ask you the same question. That was always your problem. Too many questions. You find answers in the doing of things, not in asking questions. What does that even mean? I was getting flustered, while he still remained cool as a cucumber. Look, I want to know what you've got planned for me. Where we go from here. How should I know? You got your life back. What you do with it is entirely up to you. Somehow, I doubted that. But how could you just do that? Just walk away after everything we've seen, after everything you've shown me? He shrugged. What were you expecting? There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There's no endpoint. No goal. Just things continue on. And what goes around, comes around. Yeah. Thanks for that, Yoda. That really cleared things up to no end. He gave a tired little half smile. I think deep down we both already know how this is gonna pan out. Let me force your hand. He reached into his pocket, and in an instant my heart was in my mouth. Don't move! You'll be needing these. He threw something towards me. I caught a glint of metal in the fading twilight. Did I mean to pull the trigger? I honestly don't know. It all happened in an instant. The crack of the pistol sounded obscenely loud coming from that dainty little toy of a gun. But the bullet somehow found its mark, despite my trembling hand. And the man who'd been my constant companion for the past 12 months instantly crumbled to the ground. I looked down to see what he had thrown at me. 2 bullets for the Derringer lay at the dirt by my feet. I dragged his body into some bushes by the side of the road, and I sat in the van to think. I rolled myself a cigarette to calm my nerves, and as the van filled with smoke, I loaded up the gun with the 2 bullets I'd been given. I sat there for a very long time, the loaded gun cradled in my hand. Eventually, I came to a decision. I put the gun in the back of my pocket, and I started up the van and drove out to the bridge, the place where it had all began. Maybe my companion had been right. Maybe things should turn full circle. The events of the last year cycled round and round in my head. There was no way I could go back to living a normal humdrum life. Not after everything I'd seen. There was simply no place for me in the world anymore. Everything had lost its luster. And when your only choice is no choice, you just do what has to be done. I pulled up to the bridge and got out of the van. Walking up to the parapet, I felt empty and numb, like a machine, just going through the motions. Then, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a figure, standing there, framed in the cheap neon glow of the streetlight, gazing down at the still waters below. Just another pilgrim, a fellow traveler. I let out a dry, sardonic laugh and walked towards him, my fingers lightly caressing the Derringer in my pocket. After all, when you think about it, a year's not really a long time at all, is it?